The 1970s had some of the warmest, smoothest, most radio-friendly music ever made. But underneath a lot of those polished productions and catchy hooks were lyrics that were possessive, predatory, manipulative, or just outright dark. And most people singing along had absolutely no idea. These are 13 songs from the 1970s nobody realized were evil. Number 13, Run Through the Jungle, by Creedence Clearwater Revival. Creedence Clearwater Revival released Run Through the Jungle in 1970 as a double A-side single alongside Up Around the Bend. Both sides reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. John Fogerty wrote both. Run Through the Jungle has been widely interpreted as a Vietnam War song. The jungle of the title read as Southeast Asia, the running as the experience of soldiers in combat. That interpretation was so common and so persistent that Fogerty spent years addressing it in interviews, insisting that the song was actually about gun violence in America, about the 200 million guns in circulation in the United States at the time he wrote it, and the danger that represented to American society. Whether the song was about Vietnam or domestic gun violence, neither reading was particularly comfortable, and neither was what most radio listeners in 1970 were processing when they heard the swampy, atmospheric production and Fogerty's voice coming out of their speakers. The record felt like a piece of Southern Gothic atmosphere, all murk and momentum, and the specific sonic world that CCR had built across their peak albums. The darkness in the lyric was audible, but the specific argument being made was not, which meant that a song making a pointed statement about either war or gun culture became simply a great-sounding rock record that people turned up when it came on. Creedence Clearwater Revival broke up in 1972 following internal tensions, primarily between John Fogerty and his brother Tom, and the band's other members. The legal complications that followed kept Fogerty in litigation for years. The records they made between 1968 and 1972 have remained in continuous rotation ever since. Run Through the Jungle has never left the radio. Most people who love it have never quite decided what it is about. Number 12, Afternoon Delight, by Starland Vocal Band. The Starland Vocal Band released Afternoon Delight in 1976, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July of that year, where it stayed for 2 weeks. The group won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 1977, beating out Boston, the Brothers Johnson, and Natalie Cole, a result that has since been cited in virtually every discussion of the Grammy's most surprising choices. The song was written by Bill Danoff, one of the group's founders, and it presented itself, through its production, its harmonies, and its gentle acoustic arrangement, as a warm and wholesome piece of mid-1970s pop. The instrumentation was soft. The vocal blend was sweet. The song sounded like something you could play at a family gathering without anyone raising an eyebrow. Subject matter was sexual. The afternoon delight of the title was not a snack or a leisurely stroll. The entire lyric was a description of a daytime sexual encounter, constructed with enough euphemism and melodic pleasantness that it sailed through radio without triggering the kind of scrutiny that more direct language would have caused. Parents hummed along. Children heard it on the car radio. Nobody at the breakfast table was having the conversation the song was actually about. It became one of the defining examples of how a production aesthetic can entirely conceal a lyric's content from an audience that isn't listening. Number 11, What's Your Name, by Lynyrd Skynyrd. Lynyrd Skynyrd released What's Your Name in 1977 as part of their album Street Survivors, which came out 3 days before a plane crash killed lead singer Ronnie Van Zant and guitarist Steve Gaines. The album reached number 5 on the Billboard 200. The song itself reached number 13 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song described a touring musician's encounter with a girl in a hotel room, her name forgotten by morning. The encounter treated as one of many similar ones on the road. The narrator is not conflicted about any of this. He is cheerful. And the arrangement, a rolling good-time rock groove entirely consistent with Lynyrd Skynyrd's sound, gave the lyric a quality of celebration rather than examination. What the song was describing, in plain terms, was a pattern of anonymous sexual encounters in which the woman involved was interchangeable enough that her name was genuinely not a priority. The 1970s rock touring culture that the lyric drew from was real and well documented, and the song made no attempt to apologize for or distance itself from it. Radio played it as a rock anthem. It was exactly what it presented itself as. And that was part of what made it so easy to absorb without thinking too carefully about what was actually being said. The album it came from carried a haunting weight because of the crash that followed its release. Van Zandt and Gaines died on October 20th, 1977, when their chartered Convair CV-300 ran out of fuel and went down in Gillsburg, Mississippi. The song and the album became part of a tragedy that changed how both were remembered. Number 10. Love the One You're With, by Stephen Stills. Stephen Stills released Love the One You're With as his debut solo single in November 1970, and it reached number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song had been written by Stills and was built around a phrase attributed to Billy Preston, who played organ on the recording. A phrase Preston apparently used as a kind of general life philosophy. The song's message was direct. If the person you love isn't present, find someone who is, and love them instead. In 1970, in the cultural context of the counterculture and its attitudes about love and relationships, this was presented and largely received as a statement of openness and warmth. The production was easy and rolling. The choir that sang on the recording gave it a quality of communal affirmation that matched the era's idealism about love as something freely shared. The problem with the song's philosophy, when examined outside its musical packaging, is that it was an instruction to seek connection with whoever happened to be available, a position that in practice tended to serve the interests of the person doing the seeking rather than the person being sought. The people most affected by this philosophy in the early 1970s counterculture were frequently the partners of those doing the loving, who hadn't necessarily signed on for the arrangement. Radio played it as a feel-good record, audiences responded to its warmth, and the ethical dimensions of what it was actually suggesting got almost no attention at the time. Number 9. The Night Chicago Died, by Paper Lace. Paper Lace was a British group who had their only significant American success in 1974 with The Night Chicago Died, which reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in August of that year. The song told the story of a fictional gun battle between Al Capone's men and the Chicago police, narrated by the son of a police officer who was present. The history in the song was almost entirely invented. Al Capone was active in Chicago during Prohibition, which ended in 1933, not in any era that matched the song's narrative framing. The details of the battle described in the lyric had no basis in documented history. The south side of Chicago, which the song referenced as Capone's territory, was not where Capone primarily operated. The song was a piece of historical fiction, presented with the confidence of fact, set to a melody catchy enough that nobody in the summer of 1974 was cross-referencing it against actual Chicago crime history. The songwriters, Brian Parker and Mitch Murray, were British, which accounts for some of the historical looseness. They were writing for an American market about a period of American history they knew primarily through popular mythology and gangster films. Murray was an experienced pop songwriter who had co-written How Do You Do It for Jerry and the Pacemakers a decade earlier. He understood how to construct a commercial record, and The Night Chicago Died was commercially constructed from beginning to end. The historical accuracy was simply not part of the brief. The record sold over 1 million copies and was certified gold. It received heavy airplay through the summer and into the fall of 1974. Nobody at the radio stations playing it had apparently assigned a researcher to check whether any of it had actually happened. Paper Lace had one more minor hit and then faded from the American charts entirely, leaving behind a number 1 record built almost entirely on invented history, delivered with complete conviction.
Chicago night.
Number 8. Patches by Clarence Carter. Clarence Carter released Patches in 1970, and it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100 and number 2 on the R&B chart. It won the Grammy Award for Best Rhythm and Blues Song in 1971. The song was written by General Johnson and Ronald Dunbar, and it told the story of a young boy growing up in poverty in Alabama, whose dying father instructs him to take care of the family. The song was enormously moving in the way it was performed. Carter brought a specificity and weight to the vocal that made the poverty and the loss feel immediate rather than abstract. The production was understated in a way that gave the lyric room to breathe. It was a genuine piece of emotional storytelling that connected with a very large audience, and Carter, who had been recording for Atlantic Records since the mid-1960s and had built a reputation as a gritty, soulful vocalist, delivered it with the conviction of someone who understood the world the song was describing. What the song also contained was a set of instructions from a dying father to a young child, a burden placed on a boy who was too young to carry it, that the narrative framed as wisdom and love, rather than as an unreasonable weight. The child in the story had no choice but to accept the responsibilities being assigned to him. The father's dying wishes were presented as the final act of a good man, rather than as the moment a parent transferred his own failures and unfinished business onto a child who hadn't asked for any of it. The song was heard as a tearjerker. It won a Grammy. Carter performed it on television programs throughout 1970 and into 1971, each performance reinforcing the emotional reading that audiences had already attached to it. The more complicated reading of what was actually happening in the story, the weight being placed on a child's shoulders by a man who had no other options, got very little attention then, and hasn't gotten much more since. Number 7. One Tin Soldier by Coven.
One tin soldier rides away.
Coven recorded One Tin Soldier for the 1971 film Billy Jack, and the song reached number 26 on the Billboard Hot 100 that year. It had originally been recorded by the original cast in 1969, but Coven's version, released alongside the film, reached a wider audience and became the version most people associated with the song. The song presented itself as an anti-war parable. Two groups of people go to war over something one group has that the other wants. The victors destroy the losing side and discover that what they fought and killed for was a message about peace written on a stone. The moral was delivered with the bluntness of a lesson, and the folk-influenced production gave it the quality of a campfire song, earnest, communal, aimed directly at the values of the early 1970s counterculture. The group performing it had a somewhat different identity than the song's message implied. Coven's 1969 debut album, Witchcraft Destroys Minds and Reaps Souls, included an inverted cross on its cover and contained content that bore no resemblance to anti-war folk parables. The contrast between the band's actual aesthetic and the material they recorded for Billy Jack was significant enough that people who knew Coven's earlier work found the pairing jarring. Audiences who encountered them only through One Tin Soldier had no idea that the group singing about peace and love had previously been presenting themselves as something considerably darker.
One tin soldier rides away.
Number 6. Indian Reservation by Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Cherokee people.
Paul Revere and the Raiders released Indian Reservation in 1971, and it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in July of that year, where it stayed for 1 week. It was the group's biggest hit and one of the best-selling singles of 1971. The song had originally been written by John D. Loudermilk in 1959 and recorded by Don Fardon in 1968, before the Raiders version became the definitive commercial recording. The song was written from the perspective of a Cherokee man describing the dispossession of his people, their land taken, their culture suppressed, their identity stripped away by the policies of the United States government. The Raiders recorded it with sincerity, and the production had a driving, anthemic quality that carried the lyrics' anger into mainstream radio without softening it significantly.
So proud you live.
The difficulty was one of authorship and performance. The song was written by a white songwriter and performed by a white band, in Revolutionary War costumes no less, which was the Raiders' stage gimmick, speaking in the first person about the experience of Native American dispossession. The emotional power of the lyric was real. The commercial transaction around it, the profits from a song about cultural erasure going to the people who had recorded it rather than to the communities whose experience it described, went unexamined in 1971. The record was a hit. The subject matter was treated as politically progressive for its moment. And the deeper questions about who was telling whose story and who was profiting from it were not part of the mainstream conversation. That conversation has developed considerably in the decades since, and Indian Reservation is now regularly cited in discussions about the use of Native American experience as raw material for mainstream pop production, a practice that was entirely unremarkable in 1971, and that looks considerably different from the vantage point of a later era.
Cherokee people.
Number 5. Timothy by The Boys. The Boys released Timothy in 1970 on Scepter Records, and it reached number 17 on the Billboard Hot 100 in early 1971. The song was written by Rupert Holmes, who would later write Escape, the Piña Colada song, and create the Broadway musical The Mystery of Edwin Drood, specifically as an exercise in getting a song banned. Holmes wanted to write something so offensive that radio stations would refuse to play it, calculating that the controversy would make it a hit. The song described 3 miners trapped underground after a cave-in. 2 of them survive. Timothy does not. The survivors, the lyric made clear through implication rather than statement, had eaten him. Cannibalism, delivered in a folk rock arrangement that gave it the relaxed quality of a campfire song, with a melody the listener wanted to hum along to before fully processing what the words were describing. Holmes's calculation was partially correct. Some radio stations did refuse to play it, but enough stations played it anyway to get it to number 17, without the full wave of controversy he had anticipated. Scepter Records told radio program directors that Timothy was a mule, that the song was about miners who had to eat their pack animal to survive. Some programmers accepted this explanation. Others looked more carefully at the lyric and declined. The song has since become one of the more famous examples of a hit record built on a premise its audience was not fully aware of while enjoying it. Number 4. Shannon by Henry Gross. Henry Gross released Shannon in 1976, and it reached number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song was a gentle, melodic piece of mid-1970s pop built around the death of a dog, or so most listeners assumed, since the lyric described a loss with the kind of soft grief that seemed appropriate for a beloved pet. The song was written by Gross as a tribute to Carl Wilson's Irish setter, Shannon, who had died. Carl Wilson was the Beach Boys' guitarist and vocalist, and Gross knew him through his connections to the music industry. Gross had been a member of Sha Na Na and had performed at Woodstock. The tribute to a friend's dead dog was genuine, and the record captured a specific quality of quiet mourning that resonated with a large audience. The production was calibrated for maximum tenderness. The melody was designed to produce a specific emotional response in the listener. The grief was real. Gross genuinely felt the loss and wrote about it sincerely. But the machinery of pop production amplified it into something very precisely engineered to make people feel sad on cue. Audiences who had never met Carl Wilson or his dog were moved by a song about an animal they had no connection to, responding to a product that had been constructed, quite deliberately, to produce exactly that response. It reached number 6. It worked exactly as intended. Number 3. Don't Stand So Close to Me by The Police. The Police recorded Don't Stand So Close to Me in 1979, and it was released in August 1980 in the United Kingdom, where it reached number 1 on the UK singles chart. It reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States, and won the Grammy Award for Best Rock Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocal in 1982. The song was written by Sting, who had worked as a school teacher in Newcastle before the band became successful, and it described a teacher's awareness of a female student's attraction to him, and his own awareness of his attraction to her. The song does not present this situation with condemnation. It presents it from the teacher's perspective, with a kind of agonized ambiguity, as though the ethical problem is the discomfort of the situation, rather than the fact that an adult in a position of authority is developing feelings for a minor in his care. Radio stations played it constantly. It was nominated for multiple awards. Audiences responded to the tension in the lyric without fully processing what the tension was describing. The production, the clean, precise sound that the Police had developed across their first 3 albums, gave it a cool, detached quality that worked against the emotional heat of the subject matter. Something about the musical distance made the content feel safe to listen to without examining it too closely. Sting has spoken about the song in interviews over the years, acknowledging its subject matter directly and noting that the experience of teaching, and the specific dynamic of authority and attraction in a classroom, was something he drew on from personal observation. He references Nabokov's Lolita in the song itself, which was either a literary acknowledgement of what he was writing about, or an additional layer of deflection, depending on how charitably you read it. The song's ambiguity has kept it in circulation, and kept the conversation about it going for more than 4 decades. It was recorded in 1979. Everything about the conversation it belongs in is firmly rooted in that era. Number 2. The Piña Colada song, Escape, by Rupert Holmes.
If you like Piña Coladas.
Rupert Holmes appears twice on this list, which says something about his specific gift for wrapping dark premises in pleasant musical packaging. Escape, the Piña Colada song, was released in 1979 and reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in December of that year, where it stayed for 3 weeks, making it the last number 1 song of the 1970s. The song described a man in a long-term relationship who has grown bored with his partner. He reads a personal ad placed by a woman looking for someone who shares her specific tastes, and he responds to it, arranging a secret meeting. When he arrives at the bar, the woman waiting for him is his own partner, who had also placed the ad, also bored, also looking for someone new. The song ended with both of them laughing at the coincidence and, the narrator implied, everything being fine.
If you're not into yoga.
Radio played it as a light, feel-good record. It was charming and melodically strong and easy to like. What it was actually describing was 2 people in a committed relationship who were both, simultaneously and independently, attempting to cheat on each other. The resolution, mutual laughter at the discovery, treated mutual infidelity as a cute twist rather than as evidence of a relationship with fundamental problems. The song's enormous popularity in late 1979 and early 1980 was built on audiences finding the situation funny and romantic rather than examining what it was actually saying about the relationship at its center. Holmes had written the song under some pressure. He needed a follow-up to his previous single and wrote it quickly. The speed of its composition did not prevent it from becoming one of the most played records of its era. It has appeared in films, television commercials, and countless nostalgic playlists in the decades since. Holmes has spoken about the song with considerable self-awareness in interviews over the years, acknowledging the premise's darkness with the same dry intelligence that produced the song in the first place.
If you like Piña Coladas.
Number 1. Run, Joey, Run, by David Geddes.
So run, Joey, run, Joey.
David Geddes released Run, Joey, Run in 1975, and it reached number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. It was a story song, a genre that had been commercially reliable for years, and it told its story with the melodrama of a made-for-television movie. A teenage girl is in a forbidden relationship. Her father finds out and comes after the boy with a gun, and the girl throws herself in front of the bullet to save him. She dies. Joey runs. The song was written by Paul Vance, who had also co-written Itsy Bitsy Teeny Weeny Yellow Polka Dot Bikini 15 years earlier, which gives some sense of the tonal range he was working across. Run, Joey, Run was designed for maximum emotional impact, and it delivered. It got heavy radio play. It made teenage listeners cry in the way that story songs of that era were specifically engineered to do. And it sold enough copies to crack the top 5. What nobody was examining in 1975 was the father at the center of the story. A man so unwilling to accept his daughter's relationship that he shows up with a gun. The song frames his reaction as tragedy, rather than as the behavior of a violently controlling parent. The girl's death is presented as romantic self-sacrifice. The father's violence is the engine of the narrative without ever being named as violence. Radio played it without hesitation, and audiences absorbed the emotional impact without examining the framework underneath it. Geddes had one more minor chart entry and then disappeared from the mainstream. Run, Joey, Run remained his entire legacy, a record that was everywhere for a few months in 1975, and then settled into the specific category of songs people remember without being able to name the artist.
So run, Joey, run, Joey.
If this story stayed with you, hit the like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one waiting.